Inside the mind of Ibrahim Traoré, thoughts move like armored vehicles, deliberate, silent, unstoppable. It is not the mind of a king, nor of a general in the traditional sense, gilded by pomp or polished by privilege. No, this is the mind of a soldier, forged in the crucible of dust, duty, and the long shadows of war. To understand how a young man born in the obscure village of Bondokui, a place barely etched on the world's maps, became a national icon feared by colonial powers and revered by a disillusioned people, you must enter that mind. You must strip away the headlines, forget the flags, and see him not as a president, but as a boy, a dreamer, a strategist, and a product of betrayal. Born in March 1988, just 5 months after the assassination of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's last true revolutionary visionary, Ibrahim Traoré entered a world still reeling from the loss of its moral compass. Sankara's murder was not just the death of a man, it was the suffocation of a dream. His vision of a self-reliant, dignified Africa was gunned down in a hail of bullets, orchestrated by forces both domestic and foreign. Traoré never met Sankara, but something passed to him, intangible yet indelible. A wound, perhaps, or a whisper. From his earliest days, he was fascinated not with power, but with purpose. His teachers in Bondokui's modest school noticed it. This uncanny seriousness that lived behind his eyes. A quiet intensity that set him apart. While other children chased footballs across cracked earth or bickered over cartoons, Traoré sat still, watching the horizon as if it held secrets only he could decipher. He wasn't a loud boy, he didn't demand attention. But when he spoke, others fell silent. His questions cut deep, piercing the veil of normalcy that cloaked Burkina Faso's contradictions. "Why are we poor?" he asked his teachers, his voice steady but insistent. "Why do we obey people who don't know us? Why are the mines rich but the people starving?" Even as a child, he understood paradox, and paradox disturbed him. These were not the idle curiosities of youth. They were the seeds of a revolution, germinating in the mind of a boy who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Bondokui, a small village in Burkina Faso's western Muhun province, offered little in the way of opportunity. The land was parched, the economy agrarian, the people resilient but worn. Traoré grew up in a modest family, surrounded by the rhythms of rural life, millet fields, communal labor, and the oral traditions of the Boaba people. His father, a farmer, taught him the value of toil. His mother, a weaver, instilled in him a respect for craft and patience. Yet the village was not insulated from the nation's broader struggles. The 1980s were turbulent years for Burkina Faso, marked by coups, economic stagnation, and the lingering specter of French neo-colonialism. Sankara's brief tenure from 1983 to 1987 had ignited hope, with his policies of land reform, education, and anti-imperialism. But his assassination plunged the nation into a long night of compromise and corruption under Blaise Compaoré, Sankara's former ally turned betrayer. Traoré's childhood was thus shaped by duality, the pride of his heritage and the pain of his country's subjugation. He listened to elders recount Sankara's speeches, their voices thick with nostalgia and regret. He heard whispers of foreign companies plundering Burkina Faso's gold mines while villages lacked clean water. He saw the paradox of a land rich in resources yet impoverished in spirit. These impressions burrowed deep, forming the bedrock of his worldview. To him, poverty was not a natural state, but a theft, and leadership was not a privilege, but a responsibility. His seriousness was not born of joylessness, but of clarity. He loved stories, griots spinning tales of ancient warriors, of Sundiata Keita and the Mali Empire. But he was drawn less to their glory than to their sacrifice. He played football, but his heart wasn't in it. His mind was elsewhere, mapping invisible battles. By the time he reached adolescence, his peers saw him as different, not aloof, but apart. He was the boy who asked questions no one could answer, who watched the world with a gaze too old for his years. It wasn't ambition that led him to the University of Ouagadougou to study geology. It was curiosity. To Traoré, the land was sacred. Not just soil, but power. He wanted to understand its secrets, to feel the pulse of the minerals beneath the surface. Gold, manganese, phosphate. Burkina Faso's wealth lay underground, yet it enriched foreign corporations more than its people. In lecture halls, he absorbed the science of the earth, but his mind wandered to its politics. He saw the land as a metaphor for his nation, exploited, misunderstood, yet resilient. His studies were interrupted by a growing restlessness. The real world was burning. French mining companies operated with impunity. Corrupt officials siphoned wealth. Jihadist violence, fueled by regional instability, began creeping into Burkina Faso's north. The nation was being devoured in slow motion, and the people, numb, resigned, afraid, seemed to accept it as fate. Something snapped in Traoré. Not in rage, but in resolve. The uniform called to him. He enrolled in the military academy in Kadiogo, not out of a desire for glory, but out of a need to act. The decision surprised his family. His mother urged him to finish his degree. His father worried about the dangers of soldiering, but Traoré was unyielding. The land needs protecting, he told them, his voice quiet but firm. To him, the military was not a career but a covenant. At the academy, he was neither the strongest nor the fastest. His frame was lean, his demeanor unassuming. But he saw more. He studied tactics not as formations, but as philosophies. He read military manuals the way poets read scripture, absorbing Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, and Che Guevara with equal intensity. To him, war was never just bullets. It was perception, momentum, psychology. He once told a fellow cadet, "The battlefield is the final consequence. The real war is always in the mind." His instructors noticed his intellect, but also his discipline. He didn't seek approval. He sought mastery. He trained relentlessly, not to outshine others, but to prepare for the unknown. He began keeping a notebook, small, leather-bound, frayed at the corners. It wasn't for orders or battle plans. It was for thoughts, tactical reflections, yes, but also questions, confessions, fragments of Sankara's speeches, notes on insurgent behavior, and the names of fallen comrades. To Traoré, writing wasn't a hobby. It was a form of war. A way to confront the chaos, to bring clarity where there was only fog. In one entry, barely legible through dirt and sweat, he wrote, "A soldier without a cause is a loaded weapon in the wrong hands. But a soldier with vision? That's revolution incarnate." He didn't see himself as exceptional. If anything, he saw himself as temporary. A vessel passing through history's river, trying to redirect its current. Even when off duty, he remained mentally deployed. He observed everything. How a commander's posture shifted when lying. How villagers' eyes flicked before betrayal. How insurgents used rumors as weapons, eroding trust like termites in timber. He trained his perception like others trained their muscles, until he could read silence like a map. The battlefield, he'd later say, is not where bullets fly. It's where fear creeps in, and people choose comfort over courage. That's where nations lose wars, before the first shot. Some nights, when the desert was too still, he dreamed of fire. Not the bombs or gunfire, but something deeper. Visions of his country ablaze with something brighter than pain. Hope, maybe. Change. But always, before the dream could end, there was water. A flood. Drowning voices. He'd wake drenched in sweat, fists clenched. His roommate once asked if he was okay. "Just strategy," he replied. But really, it was prophecy. By now, many of his peers had either been broken by the system or absorbed into it. Promotions seduced them. Politics softened them. But Traoré walked a different line, a tightrope stretched between idealism and duty. He knew that the closer he got to power, the more seductive it became. So he built shields, humility, discipline, distance from praise. He refused medals, declined interviews, avoided social events. To some, he seemed cold. To others, paranoid. But to those who understood war, they saw it for what it was, survival, not of the body, but of the mission. Every night before sleep he did one final thing. He folded his uniform with mathematical precision. Boots placed side by side. Belt curled tight. It was a ritual, yes, but also a reminder that even if the world burned tomorrow, discipline would still matter. Integrity would still matter. And if no one else remembered why they signed up to serve, he would. Because in his mind, there was no such thing as a small act. Not when nations could crumble over forgotten promises. Not when every gesture was either a brick in a foundation or the start of a collapse. And Traoré? He chose to build. Quietly. One action at a time. Traoré graduated with distinction and entered active service as a junior officer. His early assignments were routine, patrols, training exercises, but he approached them with the same intensity he brought to his studies. He listened to his men, learned their fears, shared their burdens. In 2014, when popular protests ousted Blaise Compaoré after 27 years of rule, Traoré watched from the sidelines, a young lieutenant with no role in the upheaval. The transition to civilian rule under Rochmark Christian Kabore promised change, but Traoré saw the cracks early. The new government was a democracy in name, but it was weak, beholden to foreign interests and paralyzed by bureaucracy. The jihadist insurgency, which had taken root in Mali, began spreading to Burkina Faso, exploiting the power vacuum. By 2018, Traoré was a captain, commanding a unit tasked with counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel. The north was a hellscape. Villages razed, schools shuttered, civilians caught between insurgents and militias. Traoré volunteered for the most perilous missions, earning the nickname Phantom, for his stealth and precision. He led ambushes, disrupted supply lines, and rescued hostages, but he sought no fanfare. His men spoke of his calm under fire, how he moved through chaos like a man who'd already accepted death. "He doesn't get afraid," one sergeant said, "but he feels everything." The killing didn't change him. It clarified him. In the field, he saw patterns. The insurgents' reliance on local informants, their exploitation of tribal tensions, their funding from smuggling networks. He also saw the military's weaknesses: corrupt leadership, inadequate supplies, and orders delayed by bureaucrats fearing accountability. Soldiers died because of these failures, and Traoré's rage grew, not loud, but surgical. He began questioning the system, not openly, but in quiet moments. "Do we serve the people or the palace?" he'd ask his men during late-night talks. The answers were silent nods. Trust in the hierarchy was eroding. Respect for authority was crumbling. By 2021, Burkina Faso was suffocating. The insurgency had displaced over 1 million people. Attacks were daily. Schools bombed, markets targeted, priests and imams executed. Kaboré's government floundered, its promises of unity drowned out by gunfire. A January 2022 coup, led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, briefly raised hopes, but Traoré saw through the rhetoric. Damiba's regime promised security but delivered speeches. The insurgents grew bolder. Villages vanished overnight. Parents buried children. Women were abducted. Traoré, now a captain in the Cobra Special Forces, watched the horizon again. And it spoke. He didn't crave power. He loathed politics, seeing it as a theater of egos. But he couldn't tolerate inertia. His men were dying in trenches while officials dined in luxury. The final straw came quietly, when his unit, pinned down by insurgents, begged for reinforcements that never arrived. Traoré watched a village burn. He saw a girl, no older than his sister, pulled screaming from the flames. He carried her to safety, her cries echoing in his mind. That night, he made his decision. Not to become a leader, but to stop bleeding. The September 30th, 2022 was swift, precise, and bloodless. Traoré and his allies moved like a scalpel, deposing Damiba in a matter of hours. He didn't storm the palace. He arrived like gravity, unavoidable, silent. In his first speech, delivered in a military base's courtyard, He didn't yell or flatter. "We took our responsibilities," he said, his voice steady. "We will not repeat the mistakes of the past." The words reverberated, not just in Ouagadougou, but in embassies, bunkers, and living rooms across the globe. This wasn't just a captain. This was a threshold. Inside his mind, the real work had only begun. Power, to him, was not a trophy. It was a weapon, to be handled with care lest it consume him. He rejected the presidential palace's trappings, choosing to stay in military barracks. He ate with soldiers, slept on a simple cot, wore fatigues instead of suits. He dissolved ministerial perks, trimmed his own security detail. Why? Because he believed leadership was a burden, not a prize. Because deep down, he feared becoming the thing he'd overthrown. A leader disconnected from the people. The people didn't just follow him, they watched him with awe. Here was a man who walked in the mud, who bled like them, who didn't just talk about struggle, he was the struggle. Market women in Dori blessed his name. Students in Bobo Dioulasso debated his vision. Soldiers in Kaya saluted him with pride. But Traoré knew the danger. Admiration is a drug. It dulls judgment. "The moment they worship me, I've failed," he told his aides, his voice low but firm. He doubled down on discipline. He restructured military command, purging corrupt officers. He reviewed combat reports himself, cross-checking details like a detective. He met with widows and orphans, listening to their grief. "You matter," he told a boy whose father had been killed in an ambush, his eyes locked on the child's. Not for cameras, but as atonement. For the lives lost, for the system that had failed them. But behind the humility burned a mind like chessboard fire. He began redrawing alliances. He questioned France's military presence, citing its failure to curb insurgency and its colonial baggage. He defied IMF strings, arguing that aid often came with dependency. He studied Sankara's policies, not to mimic, but to adapt. Traoré believed independence without dignity was just a nicer form of slavery. He moved to nationalize mines, redirecting gold profits to schools, hospitals. He opened diplomatic ties with Mali, Guinea, and Niger, neighbors who shared his pan-Africanist vision. To him, unity wasn't a slogan, but a shield against global manipulation. Critics called him naive. France and Western media branded him a radical. Assassination threats mounted, whispers of plots in Abidjan, drones over Ouagadougou. Economic sanctions loomed. But Traoré never blinked. In his mind, the future was clear. Africa either builds itself or remains a resource farm. He knew fear is a colonialist's last weapon. So he made himself fearless, or at least unyielding. Inside that mind, every day is a war. Against complacency, against ego, against despair. He rises at 4 a.m., trains with his men, sweat soaking his fatigues. He reads at night. History, warfare, economics, fueling his strategies. He studies enemies, not to hate them, but to understand them. To him, the enemy isn't a man. It's a system, a virus wearing new masks. He once told a journalist, "If I disappear tomorrow, let the mission remain." That's his legacy. Legacy, not a statue, but an echo. He's not interested in long reigns, but in long change. To his soldiers, he's a mirror, reminding them why they fight. Not for oppression, but for dignity, identity, defense. When he walks through Ouagadougou's streets, people don't chant like cultists. They nod. They clap. They say, "This one is different." In a continent of recycled disappointments, Traoré is a glitch. A man who broke the ladder and built a new path. Inside his mind, there's a storm. Guilt for comrades lost. Rage at neocolonialism. Hope tempered by realism. Above all, a vow whispered every morning, never betray the people. Because the battle isn't just on the ground. It's in a nation's psyche. It's in the courage to act when others falter. It's in knowing one misstep can unravel everything. So he steps carefully, boldly, precisely. The world watches, some in fear, some in hope, all in silence. Because when a soldier becomes a nation's architect, you don't just witness history. You witness a mind that refused to be ordinary. And that is Ibrahim Traoré. Legends aren't born, they rise. If this gave you chills or insight, hit that like, subscribe to witness more untold journeys, and drop a comment on your favorite Traoré moment. And hey, share this with someone who still thinks leaders have to be old.